One other thing, I guess we got a letter or a card from Zelda. I'll probably read this later on in the service as well, but it just says, "Hello, dear church folks, enjoyed the Bible study in Acts, so inspiring, and then the message in Luke, a great story. I'm so sorry for Michelle. I'll be keeping her in my prayers. I pray often in my daily thoughts of the sadness, blessings, and good wishes. 5 things God wants us to remember. We are never alone. Nothing takes him by surprise. When we are weak, he is strong. He's the God of new beginnings. His love never gives up on us." So, in Christian love, Zelda. So, just wanted to read that for you. All right. So, something's changed here. I don't think this cord. I'm going to trip over this thing as we go here. I guess we're using the stand to hold it now. All right, so last week, Jimmy mentioned, of course, that I would be taking over for a few weeks here, and that we're kind of rotating out a little bit as far as teaching the Sunday morning class. And he also mentioned that we've been seemingly stuck on talking about suffering. I got to get rid of this pen, too, because otherwise I'll play with it the whole time. That we've been focused on talking about suffering. And, you know, I guess that's because we were having a class on Job for several weeks, actually months, I guess. And then when you took over, you started talking about hope in a troubled time, or in a troubled world. So, of course, those topics or those, Job and that topic lend themselves to a lot of discussion about suffering. So that's, I think, why we're kind of been focused on that. But there's another reason that we've been focused on it as well, besides those things. I think it's because of the situation here in America and in the church and in general and in this church right now, that we're seeing right now. Of course, with COVID-19 and all the other things that have been going on in the world, there's been a lot of suffering for people. And then even in this little church, small church, over the past couple years, we've had numerous deaths. We've had members lose loved ones. We've had a lot of major illnesses, chronic health issues. We've lost members to various things, some just moving on to other places, but some moving away from the church. And of course, those are the more painful ones that hurt us whenever people actually leave the church. And there's been other traumatic events, for people here in this congregation. So, as we've always talked, we're just on a day when everybody would be here, I guess we'd probably be about 70, maybe. I mean, we're a small congregation; we're not very large, and we see all of those things happening just within our small group. So how that is on a bigger scale, as far as how many people are hurting and suffering. There's another thing, though, as well. There's been a lot of error taught, and I think especially in American churches, about how Christians are blessed. There are many teachers that teach something similar, actually, to what Job and his friends thought, as far as God blesses his followers with material blessings, and then and it's based on how good they are. And then often those teachers, it's also how much you give to their organization as well, which I've never totally understood the dynamic there. But
you're giving to God, not the organization. That's how.
Yeah, you're giving to God, yes. So anyway,
Seed money,
yes. It'll come back to you is the thinking, yes. The problem with that teaching, besides the fact that we don't see it in the Bible, is that it causes people to lose faith when it doesn't happen that way. I mean, and you can pretty clearly see that it doesn't happen that way. I mean, it's not like it's hard to see the evidence that things don't work that way. So, we see many good people that never prosper with money or those kind of things, and we see many evil people that become rich and gather power to themselves. So it's a dynamic that we see in the world, so it's pretty easy to disprove that line of teaching, and if that's what you think is supposed to happen and it doesn't happen, either you think you're a horrible person or you think God's a liar, right? That's whenever those kind of things happen. So that's a big deal, and it's a big problem. So I think that's another reason why we focus so much on it, because it's like we know these things are happening, and so we want to confront it head on. You don't deny what the facts are. You got to hit it head on. Probably most of you aren't familiar. I think I probably mentioned him before, but there's a Christian singer named John Rubin. He has a song that's called "What About Them?" And it has a line in it that says, "Puff the magic Jesus floats around the universe. The United States is his favorite place on the whole entire earth. So sing your songs and wave your flag and thank the Lord for all you have. But what about them? Did you forget about them?" He's kind of a rapper, so it's kind of an interesting way of putting it. But I think it's a pretty powerful accusation, I guess you would say, or observation of the way things are. And I think it's also similar to, you remember, I think the last time that I did talk a little bit about, we did some lessons about a couple of Casting Crowns songs. One of them was "Start Right Here," where it talks about how Christianity in America has really been modified away from what the Bible teaches. I don't know, was I hearing myself there?
DP's watching the game.
Oh, speaking of DP, I wore the Pittsburgh shirt today because Pittsburgh did win yesterday, the Pirates, and we're hoping for a Penguins win tonight because since the what I would call a fairly dirty hit on Crosby, they haven't done well, but hopefully they'll be able to come back tonight. But anyway, that's why I wore the Pittsburgh shirt today. But that song was talking about how we want, in America, we want our Christianity to kind of stay in a certain bubble or in a certain way. You know, we want they say we want our blessings in our pockets and our missions overseas. We don't want to get our hands dirty working in our own cities and towns. And it's important that we realize, you know, what the culture that has developed in some of the churches, so that we can keep ourselves into falling into erroneous religion or less meaningful religion. You know, we don't want to, as a Christian, it shouldn't just be about just attending church services or church events. There's a lot more to being a Christian. It should be throughout our lives and everything we do. So we need to really embrace what it means to be a Christian throughout all aspects of our lives. And then along with that, we also need to be able to help maybe overcome some of the stigma or the things that people believe in error, to try to teach them, because a lot of people have left the churches or don't see that as being important anymore because of some of that teaching and some of that erroneous belief, I think. So anyway, that having been said, that's why we've kind of hit on suffering so much, because of that dynamic and what we're trying to do there. And we will still continue along with suffering to some degree, because Job, we're going to pick back up with Job, and of course, Job deals a lot with suffering. But there's a lot more to Job as we go through it that we'll talk about. What I wanted to do today was kind of get back into it, because it's been several weeks since we've talked about Job. So what we're going to do is have a review and a quiz, I guess. You don't have to have been here to answer the questions. If you know the answers, of course, we talked about them in a certain way, so I'll bring that back up as we go. But I'm going to ask you guys questions just to see what you think and what we remember. And it's a good opportunity, too, because I think as we were going through the lessons, I wasn't really able to just ask these questions in this way to kind of lay out and get some of these questions that talk about what was going on in Job. All right, so where we had gotten to, well, of course, we started off the story of Job talking about who he was. He was a righteous man who lived in the land of Uz. You know, how do we know that the story of Job is something that actually happened and not just a story? You know, some people claim that it's just a story that has a good meaning or whatever, but how do we know that he actually lived?
biblical historians. Go ahead and read.
Biblical historians. Yes. Yes. Okay, yeah. From things that we've heard and learned with it, yep.
So there was, and so I was always kind of glad person. Everybody else was doing it, but I wasn't. I mean, it was like they were, and another. And I couldn't understand what they were reading because it was this is when I was younger.
Yes.
Grant, one thing, we know that God had talked. I can
Talk.
see
What's-
figures of God putting something in that didn't happen.
Right.
You know, it's not a fictitious thing.
Right. So one of the things that we know is that other writers mention Job, right? The book of Job, well, first off, the opening of the book is similar to other openings of the book. Like it just basically says, in fact, we can read it real quick here. Job 1:1. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless, upright, fearing God, and turning away from evil. So we know that Job, there's no indication there that it's a fictitious story or anything like that. We know that there's other writers that wrote about Job. Ezekiel 14:14, Job is mentioned along with Noah and Daniel. Says, even though these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in its midst by their own righteousness, they could only deliver themselves, declares the Lord God. So if you're going to argue with the historicity of Job, what do you say about Noah and Daniel? Of course, some people would argue with the historicity of those two as well. But once again, there's no indication from the Bible records that there would be any reason to doubt that Job was an actual person who lived and that the story is true. Also, James 5:11 talks about the patience of Job. Also, Job is said to live in Uz, which is a region also mentioned in Jeremiah 25:20 and Lamentations 4:21. And there again, those, unless you're going to attack the whole of the Old Testament record and the Bible, would once again indicate that is an actual place that exists.
Well, but even if I may kind of an anti-religious bent here,
Yep, go. Uh-huh.
forget about the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
Uz existed historically.
Yep. Yep. That's my last point then too. Yeah.
For a long time, it was believed the Sabaeans didn't exist, and in the last 100 years, they found out not only did they exist, but they were in fact marauders and raiders, and we know exactly where their home base was.
Right. So the Sabaeans were the group that attacked Job. One of Job's, I forget which place it was. I guess either his herds, I think it was. So yeah, the Sabaeans were marauders. So we know that they existed.
And we even know where they came from.
And we know,
where they
right.
went to.
So we know things that are mentioned in Job. well, in fact, there's nothing that's in Job that's been proven not to exist, really, is the way.
And that's
Yeah.
kind of the point. If you have a fairy tale story, you don't name real people, real places. You manufacture.
Right.
If we could pick, Tolkien, Middle Earth.
Right.
And we could go on to all the other fanciful stories that aren't reality. But this smacks fully, when you start Luke, names, dates, places.
Exactly, yeah. So the way the book's written indicates that it's a real thing. Like it's not trying to be just a story to a fanciful story. Yeah. And there's and in addition to that, there's also other non-biblical documents that refer to these things, as well as even Job, as early as 2000 BC. There's non-biblical documents. I don't know what all they were. I'm not going to get into that, but there are documents out there. So we know that he existed. When did he live? I just gave you an easy answer. All right, why are the crickets going, guys? Because nobody wants to answer, huh? When did Job live? Sometime prior to 2000 BC, right? We're not exactly sure, but we do have some idea that it had to be in the patriarchal age. We know that there's no mention of the law of Moses. We know that Job served as a priest for his family. And we know that Job had a longer lifespan than once you get to a certain point. Like he had to coincide with Abraham or before, basically, based on that lifespan. So we know that he's in the patriarchal age. We don't know exactly when in there, but somewhere in that.
And keeping in mind the land of Uz is not far from, it's across the Gulf there, but it's not far from where Abraham got to start.
Right.
So, most people don't realize, they think, Abraham's a Jew. The Jews don't exist yet. He was actually a Chaldean, or if you will, a Babylonian,
Right.
or in modern terms, a Persian.
Persian, right, yep.
So,
Yeah, well, because at that point, the Jews come from Abraham, so yeah, that would be correct, yeah. Okay, so we covered that Job existed. We kind of know the general time area where he was. So then we started talking about what happened to Job. We got into the first chapter, and so in the first chapter of Job, God has some kind of a meeting with the sons of God. And as part of that meeting, Satan comes to the meeting. Now, we talked about how we don't, what are the sons of God? And we're not going to rehash everything that we covered. What are the sons of God? And, why does Satan come to this meeting? So we talked about that. But, I don't know exactly what the purpose of the meeting was and who the sons of God were. But like I said, we gave some possibilities as to what that was. But there are several important things we discussed about Satan. I don't know if you remember, we took a lesson or two to talk about Satan. Does anybody remember, some of the important things we talked about Satan that are important for us to learn from this and from scriptures in general? A disguiser or accuser. Yeah, an accuser, yep.
He did, when he had that meeting from God, that he said that Job was not a righteous man, and he said, well, if he's not, then you can have him. So that's when all the...
Right, yeah, that stemmed from him accusing...
He did not go away from God the whole time.
What's that?
He did not stray away from God the whole time. He stayed faithful.
Right.
Even though all the stuff that the devil did.
Right, even though the devil attacked Job, Job didn't stray from God. There's an important lesson that we can learn in that, yes.
also, the devil is not all powerful.
Yeah, that's a very important, yeah, he's...
Power is limited by what God will permit.
Yeah, he had to ask God, for permission.
He did. He asked whatever
Yeah.
you will.
And he's created. We know he's created. He's not God. He's not deity. It's not like God and the devil are on equal footing.
You see that in so many movies.
Right. Yeah, they're not, it's not, I mean, there is a battle of good versus evil, but it's not the way sometimes we think of it. God's going to win, or has won, depending on how you want to phrase that. It's not because God is deity, the devil is not. He's a created being. What else did we cover there that might be an important thing, or do you remember anything else? Yep. Okay. So all things that God created are good, originally good, meaning that Satan was not created. Getting buzzed by something. As an evil being, but he became bad, and we read several scriptures that talked about that fall. Job 4:18 actually kind of talks about that as well. It says about what can happen. It says, referring to God, he puts no trust even in his servants, and against his angels he charges error. So that indicates there was some kind of a rebellion in heaven, which is also mentioned in 2 Peter 2:4. So we see, you get that the battle between Archangel Michael and the devil. So we see some of that in Revelation as well. So the angels were created good. People were created good. And actually in just a minute, we'll talk about, well, what causes the evil? What happens? What does that? The main point that I wanted to drive home about Satan, which we've kind of covered in this, is that he's a formidable enemy. Like, he shouldn't be underestimated. We need to know that he is a formidable enemy, but we also can't overestimate him. He cannot do anything to us because Jesus is going to be victorious over him, has been victorious over him, and he can't take us away from God unless we allow him to do so. So we need to recognize the danger, but also recognize that we have victory. We have a way of winning against him. Okay, so like we were talking about at the meeting that God has here, it's interesting to note, he points out the righteousness of Job. The devil doesn't come and say, hey, let me attack Job. God says, have you seen my servant Job? And then Satan says, oh, he's only your servant because of how much you've blessed him. Not in those exact words, but basically indicating that. And so he accuses God's servant of only being his servant because of his blessings, basically. Satan always acts as an accuser, trying to take something down. So in response, God allows Satan to attack Job. Now, here again, I've kind of answered this question, but I want a little bit of a different take on it. Why do you think God allowed Satan to attack Job? To smack Satan?
Satan's he's not all powerful, he's not omnipresent, and he certainly isn't all-knowing.
Right.
But he's acting like a know-it-all, and he's not, I think we miss this when we go, he accuses Job. I don't think he's accusing Job as much as he is accusing God. And
right.
God is going to use Job to smack him.
Teach him a lesson.
Right. And here's another question with that. Did God need to do that for his purposes? Why do you think God did that?
For Job.
For Job's purposes?
For us.
For us, yes.
And for Satan.
And to show Satan where he is, yeah.
But yet I can't get over the cosmic battle here. Satan's a multi-time loser and doesn't seem to quite grasp that it's all lost.
Right. Yeah, the way I summarize it, and I'll try to put this out, is that the book itself is primarily a defense of the absolute glory and perfection of God. And God allows Satan to remove a vast amount of Job's comforts in order to prove that Job will serve God even without the blessings God had given him. And it shows that God is worthy of our praise because he is God, apart from the blessings he provides. And it's important, like I said, it's important to know God didn't need to demonstrate this. There's nothing in it for God. Like, it's not something like where you're out on the football field or basketball court or something, you're proving you're the better team. That's not what's happening here. God's proving to us and to the devil that he is in charge. So the lessons are provided for our benefit. So we see the way that Satan attacks Job. First he takes away his material possessions and he kills his children. And then he gets permission again from God to go back and actually physically attack Job, take away his health. And what does God say? He says, just don't kill him. Yeah. Yeah, the pain that all of us have suffered pain of some sort, I'm sure, in our lives, like physical pain. Think of whatever the worst pain you have is, and I'm sure that was getting inflicted or even beyond, in some cases, on Job. That's what you're talking about.
It's something that always amazes me. We talk about Satan was an angel, and I am so grateful that Christ came to die for mankind, not for the angels.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. The angels didn't need Jesus to die, because that's something for us here on earth. Yeah. That brings up, as far as the angels go, that's just a whole nother discussion as far as what's happening with the angels. But yeah. But yeah, he came for us.
Yes.
And that's also another part that we'll hit a little bit here as we talk. All right, so he gets permission to attack Job physically, and at this point is when we talked about Job's wife tells him, why don't you just curse God and die? And we talked a little bit about why she may have said that, and spent a little time on that. And I don't, sometimes we think she's just a horrible person, and because of what she said, because when you read what she says, it sounds pretty bad. But you got to remember, she's suffering just like Job is. And as we'll discuss in a little bit, the thinking of the day is if you're bad, you're going to get punished. And what's the worst thing you could do? Curse God. So she's saying, basically, you're wanting to die. Why don't you just curse God so you can die? That, I think, plays a role into it. And I don't think it's like she's just this horrible person just because she said that. Now, is she helping the situation? No. But I don't think that it's like, she's just this horrible person that was just had no character or anything like that. Like, I think she just was stuck in a bad situation and handled it differently than what she should have. All right, so this, of course, led us to a conversation dealing with the problem of pain and suffering and the existence of evil. And I don't know if, hopefully you remember, there's actually a couple, and I should hold this up because some of this kind of comes a little bit from, this is a book about the book of Job by Wayne Jackson. So some of the information comes from there. And also, we went through a long study. I have another commentary that I'm dealing with Job, and then we went through a long study dealing with the book by Thomas Warren, Have Atheists Prove There Is No God? That deals with this problem of pain and suffering. And what Thomas Warren was doing with with the book Have Atheists Prove There Is No God is he's a debater, and he made a very logical argument and pointing out, all the different steps and all the different arguments that are being made for people who say that there is no God because evil exists and because of pain and suffering. And the exact argument, I forget the name of the person he was responding to, Mackey, I think was his name, who was an atheist of the day. I think it would have been in the 80s, 70s or 80s. It might even be before that. I forget now. But the argument that was being thrown out there was there's a contradiction in stating that God is all good and all powerful, and yet evil exists in the world. So he's saying there's a contradiction there. How can God be all good, all powerful, and yet there be evil? How can that be? Or put it another way, if God wills that evil exists, then he's not all good. If he does not will it, then he's not all powerful because evil exists. So that's the argument that was thrown out. And so what I want to talk about here briefly, and like I said, we're not going to go into a weeks-long discussion on this because we've already covered it. But do you remember some of what we talked about how to counter this argument. Well, and before we even say that, we have some options of what we can do in response to that argument. What are some things we shouldn't do?
Agree with it.
Agree with it. Yeah, we shouldn't agree with it. Exactly. Yep. We shouldn't just accept it. What else shouldn't we do? Retaliate. We shouldn't deny that the evil exists, right? You can't be an ostrich and bury your head in the sand and say, "Oh, I don't think evil exists."
What is man? What is man?
What?
Evil exists in man.
Well, yeah. That's some of what we should do. Yeah. Right now, yeah. What shouldn't we do in response to it? We shouldn't accept there's no God. We shouldn't accept a weakened version of God. We shouldn't deny that evil exists. And we shouldn't just say, well, we just have to rely on our faith. Like, you just throw it out. We shouldn't just do that. All right, so now let's talk about what should we do? And I think Elton was kind of headed down this road here, and what he was just saying, what role do people have in that? Think about that. But, all right, so what can we say, or what do we need to know in order to refute that argument?
We have free will, which means God can still be all-powerful, but permit other people, other beings, including angels, to make choices.
Right.
So the fact that we make choices does not negate God's power.
Yeah, I think that's the single biggest argument is free will. When you get down to it, if God allows us to have free will, then there has to be evil.
There has to be a choice.
A choice between good and evil. Yes. So, because God could have created us where we had no choice.
In which case, we're not the very definition of human. We become nothing more than robots.
Right. Yeah. Then we don't have that. The dynamic is totally changed if that's the case. And we talked a lot about that. The first thing we need to do is know what evil actually is. As far as to be able to talk about this. Like, some people would think, let me give an example. Is a tornado evil? We talked about that. Or a hurricane, or those kind of things, like, are natural. In order for something to be evil, the definition of evil is actually, I don't know if this is the dictionary definition, but God's definition of evil would be something that goes against him. Somebody making a choice, choosing to go against him.
Well, actually, the word sin itself, correct me if I'm wrong here, Jimmy, but is hamartia, which means simply to miss the mark.
And whose mark is it?
Well, it's God's standard. That doesn't,
Yeah.
and this is important, that doesn't mean that you've done something evil. It means simply that you have not done that which you should have done.
Right.
Paul, Romans 7. I know the things I should do, and yet I do not do them, and instead I do the very thing that I detest.
Yep.
He misses the mark.
This is Mark. Yep. Yeah, and to do. There's another scripture that talks about to not do. I forget exactly what it is, but the one that talks about to be. James.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those who know the right thing
To do and then not do it.
Sin.
Yep.
Missing the mark.
Missing the mark. Yep. Exactly. Sorry.
Yeah, Webster defines evil as morally reprehensible, arising from actual or imputed bad character or conduct.
Right. So from a normal use of the word evil, that would be your definition there. Morally reprehensible. So that's a good definition, I think. It's from Webster's or whatever. So that's good. But natural disasters and diseases are not evil in and of themselves. They have no will. They have no desire to like, it has to come from, there's a will involved whenever you're talking evil. Somebody's intentionally doing something. It's a choice being made.
I mean, I'm going to talk about this in the sermon, ironically, today, but, I think when we're dealing with all kinds of different tragedies, certain things, even though they don't make sense, we can process them. Natural disasters, I've seen it time and time again where people die from them. And even though it's painful and even though it's horrific, it's life-changing, it still kind of makes sense because we can say things like, well, natural disasters just happen, you know? Like, those things kind of happen, and it's hit or miss, or it might be 1 in a million chance of dying by a tornado, but it happens, you know? I think the thing that we really struggle with is when we've been badly hurt by somebody who we thought was a good person and that person had an evil heart. Like, that messes with our whole world, and it's so hard to have any finality in that or any to make any sense of that.
Right.
And I've seen that kind of trauma wreak more havoc in the lives of people than any other kind of disaster, including, you know, sickness, chronic illness, those sorts of things.
Yep.
Even that we can kind of make sense of. But the other, you know, evil is really hard for us to process.
To deal with, yeah.
Yeah.
Because
And a lot of the disasters, they always say, well, it's an act of God, you know, and I guess it is, these storms and tornadoes and.
yeah, in a way, yes. And we discussed that in a way. God created the world, so in a way it is. But as far as this is my personal opinion on that, and we covered it a little bit, is that God created the world, and He created it in a way, and we'll talk about this more when I hit the question next week. We're not going to get to it this week. But, you know, why did God create the world the way He did? And we'll talk a little bit about that. But to say that He's like, I don't feel like God's looking at a certain town and saying, I'm going to put a tornado into this town, or I'm going to hit this location with a hurricane. Like, I think it's a function of why he created the world the way He did, and then these things happen. That's my personal take on it. I don't know that anybody has a full answer as to some of the, you know, why certain things happen the way they do. Well, I shouldn't say I don't know. I know nobody does. So I know nobody can answer that fully. But, you know, my take on it, on the natural disasters and things like that, is God created the world the way He did, and those things actually serve a purpose. And that's what we'll talk about. But I don't necessarily think that He's like reaching down and saying, I'm going to hit this particular place, or I'm going to do this or that, like some people think of it like that. What else? What are some other things that we talked about to refute the argument that that the existence of evil shows that God can't be all powerful or all good? We got just another minute, so we can't hit all of them here right this minute. We'll pick up here again next week, but. Now you can put the crickets up there, Dave. You weren't giving them enough time before. All right, there it is. All right. Okay, well, we're actually going to end right here, and then we'll pick up with that question next week to go through and talk about how we can refute that argument. And I'm expecting that probably we'll finish the review next week, and then we'll start getting into some more of the discussion that Job's friends are having with him, which is where we left off last time. So, all right, thanks everybody.